My parents took my passport so I couldn't leave the country, but they never thought I would discover the $86,000 secret hidden under my name. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Kaya Vale, and for the first time in my life, everything finally seemed to be going right. After years of studying late at night, working double shifts, and barely sleeping, I got accepted into a medical research program in Switzerland. It felt unreal. I kept checking my email over and over because I couldn't believe someone like me actually made it. I spent weeks preparing for the move. My apartment was filled with packed boxes, travel papers, and little notes reminding me what still needed to be done before my flight. I was nervous, but I was happy too. That happiness disappeared 2 days before I was supposed to leave. I opened my drawer to grab my passport, but it was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had misplaced it while packing. I searched every shelf, every bag, even the kitchen for some reason. After hours of tearing my apartment apart, panic started taking over. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I drove to my parents' house hoping they would calm me down, but my mother, Brenna, acted strangely calm. She looked at me and quietly said maybe this was a sign that I shouldn't leave my family behind. Something about the way she said it didn't feel normal. Later that night, while walking past the kitchen, I heard my parents whispering. My father said, "We just need more time before she finds out about the account." And in that moment, I knew my missing passport was not an accident. The next morning, I went back to my apartment determined to find my passport before things got worse. I emptied closets, opened every box I had packed, and even checked places I knew made no sense. My stomach felt heavy the entire time. Deep down, I already feared someone had taken it on purpose. My parents suddenly became very involved in helping me search. My mother kept pretending to care, but she spent more time watching my reactions than actually looking around. My father, Orson, acted annoyed every time I mentioned Switzerland. He kept saying things like international travel was risky and people who moved away forgot where they came from. At first, I tried not to argue. I told myself he was only worried because I was his daughter. But the more he talked, the stranger it sounded. He wasn't concerned about my safety. He sounded angry that I was leaving at all. That afternoon, my younger brother Nilo stopped by my apartment with coffee. He looked nervous the entire time. While helping me move some boxes, he casually mentioned that Mom and Dad had already searched my place the day before while I was working. I froze. I never gave them a key. Nilo immediately realized what he had said and tried to change the subject, but it was too late. My chest tightened as pieces slowly started connecting in my head. I wanted to believe my parents would never sabotage my future, but every hour made that harder. Then my phone buzzed with an email from the university. They reminded me orientation was mandatory. If I failed to arrive on time, my position in the program would be given to another candidate. I sat on the floor staring at the screen, feeling like my entire future was slipping through my hands while the people closest to me acted like nothing was wrong. A few days passed, and the tension in the house kept growing. Since I still couldn't find my passport, I stayed with my parents to save money while trying to sort everything out. Every conversation felt uncomfortable. My father barely spoke unless it was to criticize my decision to leave, and my mother acted overly sweet in a way that made me uneasy. One evening, Mom asked me to grab batteries from the kitchen drawer near the fridge. I pulled it open, moving aside old receipts and take-out menus, when I noticed a sealed bank envelope with my name printed across the front. I frowned immediately. My parents never gave me financial mail directly. Growing up, they always handled things for me and said it was easier that way. At the time, I trusted them completely. I opened the envelope without thinking much about it, but the moment I unfolded the paper inside, my entire body went cold. The statement showed a balance of $86,214.53. I stared at the number over and over, convinced I was reading it wrong. I had never seen this account before in my life. My breathing became shallow as my eyes moved lower down the page. Both of my parents were listed as authorized users. My hands started shaking. Suddenly, memories I had ignored for years came rushing back. Birthday cards from my grandparents always included checks made out to me. When my Aunt Celia passed away, she left money behind for my education. During college, I sometimes received scholarship refunds, but my parents insisted on depositing everything for safekeeping. Whenever I asked about savings, they always claimed there wasn't much left after helping with family expenses. But this account proved otherwise. I sat alone at the kitchen table trying to understand how long this had been happening. The more I thought about it, the more betrayed I felt. While I struggled for years believing we had nothing, there was tens of thousands of dollars connected to my name hidden inside my parents' house. The next morning, I left the house early without telling my parents where I was going. I barely slept the night before. That bank statement stayed in my mind the entire time, and I needed answers before I completely lost control of my thoughts. The bank branch was across town. I sat in my car outside for almost 10 minutes trying to calm myself down before walking in. Part of me still hoped there had been some mistake. A woman at the front desk pulled up the account after checking my ID. The moment she confirmed it belonged to me, my stomach dropped. She explained the account had been opened when I was 16 years old. At first, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at the screen while she printed transaction records. Page after page showed deposits made over the years. Money from scholarship programs. Insurance checks. Family gifts. Even the inheritance my aunt left me before she died. But that wasn't the worst part. There were also constant withdrawals. Thousands disappeared at different times, all authorized by my parents. Some notes beside the transactions mentioned emergency house repairs and overdue mortgage payments. One withdrawal from only 3 months earlier was nearly $12,000. I felt numb sitting there. For years, my parents told me we were barely surviving. They constantly reminded me how much pressure they were under. I worked extra shifts during college because they said the family needed help. I skipped meals more times than I could count just to save money for rent and utilities. Meanwhile, they had access to my future the entire time. The woman at the bank kept talking, but her voice sounded distant in my ears. My chest hurt thinking about every sacrifice I made while they secretly used money that never belonged to them. I walked out of the bank carrying the documents in my hand, but I honestly felt like something inside me had broken forever. I waited until dinner that night before saying anything. My hands were shaking under the table while my parents acted completely normal, talking about groceries and bills like nothing had happened. I kept staring at them, wondering how long they had been lying to me without feeling guilty. Finally, I pulled the bank papers out of my bag and placed them on the table. The room went silent immediately. My mother looked at the papers for 1 second before her face lost color. My father leaned back in his chair with his jaw tight, but neither of them denied it. I asked one question. "How long have you been taking my money?" My mother suddenly burst into tears. She grabbed her chest and started saying they only used the account because the family was struggling. She kept repeating that parents sometimes have to make hard choices to survive. According to her, they never meant to hurt me. They were only borrowing the money until things got better. But nothing about it felt temporary. Then my father's attitude changed completely. Instead of apologizing, he became angry. He slammed his hand on the table and asked how I could accuse them after everything they had done for me growing up. He listed old sacrifices like buying school clothes and paying for food as if that somehow erased what they stole. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When I asked about my passport, my father looked directly at me and admitted they hid it because they were scared. He said once I moved overseas, I would eventually look deeper into my finances, discover the account history, and cut them out of my life forever. That sentence hurt more than the missing money. In that moment, I finally understood something I had ignored for years. Their love always depended on keeping control over me. The second I tried building a future away from them, they decided stopping me mattered more than my happiness. 2 days later, the email I feared finally arrived. I opened it while sitting alone in my childhood bedroom, the same room I had dreamed of escaping for years. The university thanked me for my interest in the program, but because I failed to submit my travel documents before the deadline, my place had been offered to another student. That was it. One short message erased years of hard work. I read the email again and again until the words became blurry through my tears. My chest felt tight, and suddenly I couldn't stop crying. I buried my face into the pillow like I was a teenager again, completely falling apart behind a locked door. I thought about every night I stayed awake studying while my friends went out and enjoyed life. I remembered missing birthdays, working weekends, and pushing myself through exhaustion because I believed all the sacrifice would eventually mean something. Now it was gone. Downstairs, I could hear my parents talking in the kitchen. Their voices sounded lighter than they had in weeks. My father even laughed at one point. Later, my mother knocked softly on my door and asked if I could start helping more with utilities now that I would be staying home longer. I stared at her without answering. She acted like my future collapsing was simply a change of plans. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I sat at my old desk with my laptop open. My eyes still burned from crying, but something inside me had changed. I realized nobody was going to fix this for me. So I quietly applied for a replacement passport. Then I started collecting everything I could find. Bank records. Old tax forms. Scholarship letters. Copies of deposits connected to the hidden account. I searched through drawers, cabinets, and old boxes while the house stayed silent around me. For the first time, I stopped thinking like a daughter trying to protect her family. I started thinking like someone preparing to protect herself. A few days later, I got a phone call from someone I had not spoken to in months. It was Celine, my late Aunt Celia's closest friend. She said she heard there had been problems at home and asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. At first, I almost said no. I was emotionally drained and tired of talking about my family. But something in her voice felt genuine, so I agreed. The moment I sat down across from her, she looked at me carefully and said, "You finally found out, didn't you?" My heart dropped. Celine explained that Aunt Celia had worried about me long before she passed away. According to her, my aunt often said I was the only person in the family trying to build a different life. She wanted me to travel, study, and leave town if I had the chance. Then Celine told me something I would never forget. The money Aunt Celia left behind was never supposed to help the whole family. It was meant for me alone. She specifically wanted it protected so I could escape this place and build a real future. Hearing those words nearly made me cry. Celine became quiet for a moment before saying my mother had always struggled watching me succeed. Brenna gave up many dreams when she was younger and slowly became bitter seeing me receive opportunities she never had. Instead of supporting me, she tried controlling every important decision in my life. At first, I wanted to defend my mother. Part of me still hoped there was another explanation. But deep down, I knew Celine was telling the truth. For years, whenever something good happened to me, my mother found a way to make me feel guilty for it. What hurt most was realizing other people had noticed the pattern long before I did. Still, sitting there with Celine felt different from the conversations at home. She did not excuse what happened. She did not tell me to forgive and move on. For the first time, someone looked at my pain and admitted it was real. After my conversation with Celine, I stopped wasting energy trying to fix things with my parents. I realized no apology was coming. They were only worried about losing control over me and the money they depended on for years. I picked up extra shifts at a private clinic across town and told my parents I was simply trying to stay busy after losing the program in Switzerland. In reality, I was saving every dollar I could. The long hours were exhausting, but working helped clear my mind. Every paycheck reminded me I still had a future, even if it looked different now. At the same time, I quietly started preparing for something bigger. Whenever my parents left the house, I gathered important documents and packed small boxes with personal belongings they might try to keep from me later. Old journals, legal papers, photos, my laptop, even jewelry from my grandmother. Little by little, I moved everything into a storage unit without telling anyone. Meanwhile, my mother kept bringing up money. Almost every conversation somehow turned into another financial problem. The electricity bill was too high. The mortgage payment was late again. Groceries were getting expensive. Then she started asking how much I earned from overtime shifts and hinted that families should help each other during hard times. I nodded along and acted calm, but inside, something had changed. Instead of arguing, I began paying attention. I saved text messages. I copied bank records. I wrote down dates and conversations after every argument. The more evidence I collected, the more I noticed how often my parents twisted situations to make themselves look innocent. Some nights I sat alone in my car after work, staring at the steering wheel while everything replayed in my head. I still loved them in a painful way, and that made everything harder. But the heartbreak slowly stopped feeling like sadness. It turned into determination. For the first time in my life, I was no longer trying to earn my parents' approval. Was preparing to walk away from them completely. About a month later, my parents hosted a family dinner at the house. A few relatives came over, including cousins, uncles, and my grandmother's sister. Everyone acted cheerful, pretending life was normal. I stayed quiet most of the evening, mostly listening while people talked around the table. My father seemed unusually confident that night. He kept making small comments about how important family loyalty was and how people who chased big dreams usually came crawling back home. Then he looked directly at me with a smirk and said, "Kaya figured out she can't survive without family anyway." A few people laughed awkwardly. I felt something inside me finally settle. Without saying a word, I stood up, walked to my bag near the hallway, and returned with a thick folder. I placed it in the center of the table and slowly spread out copies of the bank statements, transaction histories, inheritance papers, and account records. At first, nobody understood what they were looking at. Then my aunt picked up one page and her expression changed completely. The room became silent. I explained everything calmly. The hidden account. The money left by Aunt Celia. The scholarship deposits. The withdrawals made by my parents over the years. I even told them how my passport disappeared right before my flight overseas. Nobody interrupted me. My father's face turned red while my mother instantly started crying, saying she never wanted things to happen this way. But for once, nobody rushed to comfort her or defend them. My uncle asked my father directly if the documents were real. He couldn't answer. The worst part for my parents wasn't losing the argument. It was watching the family realize who they truly were. The same people who always acted like victims suddenly had nowhere left to hide. I looked around the table and saw shock, disappointment, and anger on faces I had known my whole life. And honestly, after everything they took from me, that silence felt better than any apology ever could. Everything changed after that dinner. Within days, relatives who used to help my parents stopped answering their calls. My uncle refused to loan my father money anymore, and even family members who normally avoided drama started distancing themselves. People were angry that my parents had spent years lying while pretending they were struggling victims. The house became tense and quiet. My mother barely came out of her room, and my father walked around angry at everyone except himself. Sometimes I caught them whispering late at night, trying to figure out who else knew the story now. But the truth was already spreading through the family. Not long after, I met with a lawyer and officially started the process of recovering part of the money connected to my account. I knew I might never get all of it back, but I was done staying silent. Gathering documents and explaining everything in detail was emotionally exhausting, but every step made me feel stronger. Then my father's problems became even worse. One of my cousins worked with a client connected to his company, and somehow the situation reached people at his job. Nobody publicly accused him of anything illegal, but the gossip damaged his reputation badly. According to Nilo, coworkers stopped trusting him the same way they used to. For once, my parents had to face consequences instead of escaping them. Meanwhile, I kept working overtime at the clinic and trying to rebuild my life piece by piece. I still felt hurt every day, but the pain no longer controlled me. Then one afternoon, while sitting in my car during lunch break, I received an email that made my hands shake. It was from the research program in Switzerland. A senior researcher I interviewed with months earlier had personally recommended me for deferred admission next year. They still wanted me in the program if I was willing to accept the offer. I stared at the screen for almost a minute before tears filled my eyes. After months of losing everything, it finally felt like my future wasn't over after all. The morning I decided to leave felt strangely calm. I woke up before sunrise and quietly packed the last of my things into my car. Most of my important belongings were already gone, sitting safely inside the storage unit I rented weeks earlier. All that remained was a small suitcase, my documents, and the new passport that had finally arrived in the mail. I held it in my hands for a long moment before putting it carefully into my bag. That passport meant more to me now than just travel. It felt like proof that nobody could trap me anymore. As I carried my suitcase toward the front door, my mother walked into the hallway. The second she saw the bags, her face fell apart. She started crying almost immediately and begged me to sit down and talk one last time. At first, I stayed silent. Then she said I was tearing the family apart over mistakes that parents sometimes make. She kept saying nobody was perfect and that families should forgive each other no matter what happens. According to her, I was being cold by leaving instead of trying to repair things. But for the first time in my life, her words no longer made me feel guilty. I looked at her and realized she still cared more about keeping control than understanding the damage she caused. My father stayed near the kitchen the entire time without saying much. He wouldn't even look directly at me. The man who spent months demanding loyalty suddenly had nothing left to say when I finally walked away. Before opening the door, I told them something I had carried inside me for years. Parents are supposed to help their children grow. They are supposed to protect dreams, not destroy them because of fear or jealousy. My mother cried harder after hearing that, but I didn't stop. I walked outside with my passport in one hand and my future in the other. And for the first time in years, leaving that house felt lighter than staying. 1 year later, I stood beside the window of my apartment in Switzerland watching snow fall across the street below. People hurried through the cold carrying coffee cups and grocery bags while soft lights glowed from nearby buildings. Sometimes I still had trouble believing this was my life now. The research program had been difficult, but I loved every part of it. For the first time, I felt surrounded by people who respected my work and encouraged me to grow instead of making me feel guilty for wanting more. Life was peaceful in a way I had never experienced before. Back home, things turned out very differently for my parents. Without access to my income or savings, their financial problems became impossible to hide. A few months after I left, they lost the house they fought so hard to keep. Nilo told me they moved into a small rental outside town and barely spoke to relatives anymore. Part of me expected to feel satisfaction hearing that, but mostly I just felt tired. So much damage could have been avoided if they had simply trusted and supported me instead of trying to control my future. Every few weeks, my mother still sent messages asking me to call home. Sometimes she wrote long paragraphs saying family belongs together. Other times it was simple things like we miss you or please talk to us. I never answered. Not because I hated them, but because I finally understood something important. Loving someone does not mean allowing them to keep hurting you. One evening, I opened my desk drawer and saw my passport sitting beside my research papers. I smiled for a second thinking about how desperately they tried to stop me from leaving. In the end, the greatest revenge was never about screaming, exposing them, or watching their lives fall apart. It was waking up every morning in the life they tried to prevent me from having. They spent years making me feel small because they were afraid of losing me. But I succeeded the moment I stopped letting their fear define my future. Do you think I made the right decision by leaving my parents behind, or should I have forgiven them and stayed? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed my story, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another video.